This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session in May 2022. And what we're going to cover is actually me and Ante, who actually cannot be here, so it's mainly me. And there's also a couple of good joint guests, hopefully panelists, are going to chip in on this conversation. We're going to talk about this. I think it was a really cool idea that, we kind of had 5 years ago that never really took off. Kind of in a wider sense, but we actually made it work. And I feel that it definitely deserves some revisiting. So it kind of started in 2017 and 2018, where kind of me and Ant were kind of sitting together on a table, and ironically, we were talking about NATO, which is a bit more relevant these days. And we were actually talking about this idea of joint defense clusters. This idea that, if you look at the Article 5 of NATO, it sort of says that they kind of binds its members together, committing them to protect each other and setting the spirit of solidarity within the alliance. And the thinking of this was, why can't we create similar groups within particular industries or similar organizations that form this kind of alliance, so that they can help each other in case of an incident, but in kind of more peaceful times, collaborating in all sorts of different things, because ultimately, unless we are a massive direct competitors, there is added value in collaborating, in working together, more importantly, in the teams, also collaborating and working together. And that's sort of the idea of, can we create a framework? Can we put something in place where we can kind of make this happen? And the idea was, it kind of arrived at, this was basically the collective defense agreement. And eventually, I think it was on this one that we arrived at the name of collective defense cluster. So it's this kind of cluster that has this sort of collective, right, of multiple companies that is focusing on the defense element of it. And fundamentally, what we then did in the following summit, so this 2017 summit, we came with the first ideas, and then we actually implemented it reasonably successful. There's a number of companies that, me and Kevin, we're working on. We kind of were CISOs, so we kind of made, the decision for those companies. And we actually had very success sharing, and collaborating with amongst us. And I think we kind of lost a little bit as we moved on and went to different companies, and we never really recreated it, because it's an interesting thing that sometimes good ideas don't always gain traction. Because I remember presenting this at the OWASP event, right? And this is actually from the summit, right? And there was a good crowd. We did a bunch of stuff, but it kind of never took over. So let's restart this idea. So there was a couple of documents that we created in 2017 that I've published recently. So I put that, there's the links there. I put that in my LinkedIn, and I will go to the document now and basically walk you through some of the ideas. And actually, Ant, took the original idea, took it to the next levels, and you'll see he already mapped even like financial collaboration stuff, which is really cool. But I think that we could also start to split this into a more practical steps, or even maturity sort of level of CDC level 1, level 2, level 3, or how can we create some rules of engagement so that we make it easy for companies to adopt this sort of defense practice. And I think it's important to take into account that the logic here is to find companies that are in a similar stage of maturity. It doesn't make sense to have a company with a 5-person security team, in the middle of a company with 100 security individuals, right? They different problems, different scales, different things. What's interesting is finding companies that are in a similar state, similar journeys, compatible kind of practices. Again, you don't want it doesn't probably work, a highly regulated company with a startup that has 0 regulations going 100 miles an hour. So, there might be cases where that work, but I think in practice, the whole idea is that these clusters should almost be a little bit fluid and dynamic, because it's not about creating a cluster for the whole industry, because we already have a number of collaborating, places where, some companies and some sectors can share data. It's more about these clusters that can kind of come together and maybe break apart, right? and then sort of, organically collaborate. So let's kind of look at this. So we were kind of big into the whole Amazon press release. So this is sort of the core of the idea, right? The core idea would be, on this day, a company was hit by a cybersecurity incident would affect the security of its web platform. After, getting the scope of the incident, realized it lacked the internal resources, defense mechanisms, expertise to handle, and in fact would affect the speed of response to sophisticated malicious attacks. What's interesting about this is today, most of the two options that most companies have is either you go to your existing contractors and companies that you worked before, or if you have cyber insurance, one of the big things that the cyber insurance companies have is a very expensive ability to bring in resources to help you handling incidents. So the logic here is that if you already have a kind of a nice collective defense cluster, a nice group, what you can do is the logic here, you trigger it. And then, of course, unless the other companies are also handling massive incidents, the kind of on-call security champions for the SOC members activate the collected incident response playbook, would then describe the activities, right? And this is the key thing, right? Due to existing pre-company, cross-company agreements that kind of form part of, that's how we talk about making this an OWASP project, and including NDAs, time allocating budgets. The other companies, not the one impacted, security experts and lead developer, for example, of machine learning capabilities, could actually, or in this case, fly or be, available to help. And the logic here is that you could see that you have company X being impacted by a problem, and then company Y allowing its resources to help doing with the incident, taking some activities, taking some responsibility. Of course, that is always company X accountability, right? The company Y guy, girl is not, it's only there to provide some extra resources, but that can make a massive difference in how that incident is handled and how that incident is actually kind of occurring. So I don't know, James, Mario, Prakash, any kind of comments on this?
I think it's not without challenges, right?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, there are kind of lots of challenges potentially, like from a legal framework, from a business framework. I mean, one of the interesting things that we kind of became accredited last year was this first.org. Have you come across that?
I think so, yeah.
So first.org is purely kind of focused on SOC and incident response, right? But it's a global organization, and you have to jump through a few hoops to get accredited, right? But pretty much it's open to everyone. So it's actually quite a big mix. It's kind of a mixture of companies, like small companies, but also like global government organizations like CrowdStrike. Some of the big vendors are in there as well. And it's kind of a same sort of principle idea, right? Like I've seen in the last few weeks, companies based out of places in Africa, like reach out saying, hey, we've been hit by ransomware, and you'll get guys in the States jumping into those calls, right? To kind of assist and guide and provide overview. I guess it's, yeah, that lot, right? But yeah, like the incident you kind of described, it's kind of almost what do you do in peacetime, right? Like, I think that's the interesting area, is like, and that's where potentially like larger companies, I mean, you kind of need to figure out what the incentive for them to be in, but actually what you kind of find is that people like to give their knowledge and their expertise in certain areas. That actually working on ransomware playbooks or how like good policies or good practices is actually a really interesting area that actually can bring lots of companies together, because there's loads of commonality, right?
Yep.
I've always liked the idea, right? It's those sort of practical steps, like like flying people across to work in an environment. I'm not entirely sure whether my CTO and my like directors are going to be overly comfortable when I said, oh, by the way, Bob's flown over from Brazil, right? But he's accidentally taken down X, Y, and Z. But it's fine, it's on me, right? Like I think, maybe I'm sort of going to one extreme, but they're the things that you kind of need to think about in those scenarios.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a good example of, that's probably almost like level 5 or level 6 of this working, right? Where, and if you look at our example, when we got this to work, I think there was one case of a company that got a bit of an attack, and we actually quickly found the resources to do that. but I feel is that peacetime collaboration, that peacetime kind of workflow that become really relevant, that I think you can add a lot of value in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. I agree, right? I think like there's stuff that you can do, like especially like where the first thing is good is because it focuses purely on incident response, right? So there's a lot of collaboration around good automation in SIEM tools. Like everyone has different SIEM tools, but like a lot of people buy a SIEM tool, plug it in, right, and then sit back and wait for it to tell you something bad's happening. And the reality is, right, that's 5% of what you should do, right? So even that type of stuff, that there's a lot of good collaborative work that actually when an incident happens, right, you're already in a much better place because of that collaboration, because you've gone to an organization, which could be this sort of CDC, right, that's actually got you to a better place than you are at the moment.
Yeah. And of course, the logic here is that everything here is open source, right? Everything here is shared, everything here, there's the point of this information, this kind of, I would say, this organization is to promote that openness, right? It's not to have a closed sort of loop. I think there's some closeness to do with, the trust relationships, which by design, we're always going to be a bit more close. But apart from that, the more we can share, the better.
But I also think like you're kind of with just the Open Security Summit, right? You're kind of almost on that precipice of that first step, right? Like we've always talked about like they're working sessions, but actually like the next step is to actually have a common problem, right? That's not sort of hypothetical, that actually is like Team X. Like I can remember Christoph was mentioning a few things in one of the sessions in the last sessions, right? Like that there was actually issues that people are trying to solve. Everyone really has the same issue, and bringing sort of the CDC together to fix those issues for each company, right?
Yeah, because I think you talk about that too, right? It's almost like there's these common problems that we almost want to do some sessions around it, right?
Well, yeah, agreed, right? And that kind of starts to bring teams working together, right? Like, and it's not necessarily outside of work capacity. It's now we're going to work with company X because we both have this problem, and we're going to spend 2 days over a number of sessions showing, telling, and fixing, right? Like, there's obviously you've got to be careful about certain types of data, but modern teams these days have got dev environments and dummy data and all sorts of crap, like sandbox environments, etc. Yeah,
that you can work on it. Yeah. So then I think what we try to do with this sort of agreement is try to come up with a, almost like what is the framework that allows that to happen, right? So if you see here, like, the sharing of cybersecurity information, why are we doing it? The kind of, you just mentioned the data classification. So as we, map out what you have access, where you don't have access, what you can share, where you can't share, right? And then kind of member organizations. And then the logic is, so in this, for example, case, okay, that would be a more evolution where imagine having a fund where, even for proof of concepts, right? Or even like bargaining power, right? You can have, to your point, you have these 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 companies who are all trying to solve the same problem or trying to buy the same tool. Why do you have 10 different assessments? Why don't you just work as one, or at least understand better what is possible, what is not possible? In a way, you're making the market better, right? Because you allow the best technology, the best service, the best solution to bubble up and to gain traction.
Well, absolutely, right? Especially if you're using like open source tooling, right? Because typically, like we did a big project with Sharphound and Bloodhound recently, right? So the open source tooling, which we kind of then just took to the next level. Now, we did that because we had a particular problem we wanted to solve, but actually there's lots of other people that are kind of maybe trying to solve the same problem. And, so you've got a framework, you've got a tool already. It's just a matter of time and resource to get it to the place where everyone can now take advantage of this product, right? So you don't,
So I can jump in as well here.
Of course.
My perspective. So I think it's twofold. One is that cluster of the same maturity I really like, because one of the biggest problem in the industry is that we talk about best practices and we're talking about different controls, but different maturity have different budgets and different challenges to overcome. One of the things that we're not really good at the industry is this collaborative. How did we solve it at this level of maturity? I go to a lot of conferences, a lot of talks, and then there's a company that can afford to spend 50 millions on one control. And then you ask for an opinion, they say, yeah, we implemented this control, but there's not that maturity level of information sharing. How do we address this with a limited budget or with a bigger budget so we can all across mature to a standard that we are happy with, but with sharing that information? The second part is that a lot of the industries, we share a lot of IOCs, indication of compromises or threat intelligence. Threat intelligence feeds are they're costly, two, they're very noisy because they don't actually give you the necessary information. So if we could share those threat intelligence between clusters of the same maturity, we know that we can address them together. How do we resolve those IOCs? How do we collectively defend against them with limited budget or big budget? But it's all that information sharing and collaborative. And how do you solve an issue at different maturity levels is completely different.
Yep. No, I think that's a great point, right? And sometimes, what is a trivial thing for one company is insanely difficult for another company, right? And the best practice without context can be, sometimes even the wrong thing to do.
Exactly. The best practice for a huge organization is going to be the wrong for an immature organization because you will try to implement it, but you're going to fail because you're not mature enough to implement that. Yeah. And I think that's the things that it'd be good from clustering together from maturity paths, because you can share that information and say, look, that's not going to work for our maturity level because we tried it and tested it. And the other thing that we use a lot of vendor questionnaires that we all replicate in their work. We all have mainly, especially in cybersecurity, similar vendors. We assess them all individually and we all raise the same risk most of the time. If we can share that information between us as well, the caveats, the pain points between vendors as well, that's going to be another thing that will save us a lot of time and pain.
Absolutely. See, that's a good example of, an area that, we could help to make the market a lot more efficient because, we can help to define what matters, share the knowledge, share the reviews, share what we're looking for, because so that it's even better for the ones replying, right, to the questionnaires, because they don't have to do it all the time. And then, even for example, if these companies all agree that the questionnaire that we want to answer is X, that already solves, that particular vendor from having to fill in 10 different ones.
Exactly. If we go to a small vendor and we're all asking them for a vendor questionnaire, it's going to take them 20 times longer to complete all of a questionnaire, when in reality, one questionnaire from all of us should be enough because we're asking the same questions. We're not asking different.
So kind of think about the next step. So maybe that's an area, right? That for kind of the CDC kind of idea is those third-party vendor assessment, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a difficult area though, right? Because I think that's where you start to, like, what are you talking about? Actually creating a common question? Because there's already a bunch of common questionnaires right out there.
Oh yeah, but
are you actually looking to share the results?
Well, I think you can have two parts of it, right? I think the easiest part is that if companies are of similar maturity, of similar industries, or similar, compatible sort of worlds, even agreeing on what is the questionnaire that we're using to submit. Yeah. I don't think we should try to create one. I think that's, if somebody wants to customize one, then they'll take it on themselves, but then they can go, hey, by the way, we customize this one because, it suits better our worlds. Hey, what everybody else doing it? Like, is anything missing from here that you guys find it useful?
Yeah, I think that's good, right? And I think also it's a lot of these security questionnaires, like you do them as part of your third-party due diligence, right? But actually, I kind of trawl through them, but like you kind of get fed up with them after a while, as long as they're kind of accredited in X, Y, and Z, and there's no customer data, blah blah blah. But actually having quite a good, having some sort of framework to look for acceptable answers or things that you should go back and challenge on, that would be quite useful.
Yeah, because I think the sharing answers, I feel it's one of those that, yes, there's some dragons there, but I think there's an argument to be said that we can make the market more efficient. And even if in the beginning you don't share the answers publicly, of course, right? Eventually it should be shared publicly, but not yet. But I think within the group, because if you think about it, right? Even if you say, well, okay, so if you don't want us to share the answer, the 5 companies are going to ask the same question, right? So ultimately, you're going to be sharing the answers with all the group, right? So
yeah.
I think I feel that can start to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. So in fact, it's a sign of a good vendor that they don't have a lot of problems with sharing knowledge, because they should be comfortable while they're pushing out, versus the company that wants to treat it as trade secrets.
Well, that's where I can remember you talking a while back about like company transparency and where you wanted to go with that, right? And I'm sure I saw something recently where there's some site you can go to where it starts that vendor transparency. There's stuff starting to happen in that space, right?
Yeah. And
that's ultimately where you want to get to, right? You don't want to necessarily have to send someone a questionnaire and then fill it all out. You want to go to a site where it says, hey, Tesco's or whatever it is, right? Or Bob's local pharmacy is certified, right? It's got everything it needs. We've done all the verification for you, and off you go.
Yep, exactly, right. So cool. I think third-party vendor management, I think, is definitely one. Oh, cool. Thomas is here. Let me bring. Katie, could you make Thomas co-host so you can chip in? So I definitely feel that's an area that then we can evolve into, right? We can find industries and vendors and part of it. I think third-party vendor assessment is probably a good one to chip in, right? Hey Thomas, sure to join in now. Cool. So just to put context, so one, the kind of the cluster idea initially was a lot about join the fence. So you can kind of see on this example here, right? A company gets attacked and then the other ones come and help them. But sort of what we've been talking about is that what's also very interesting is to find clusters of companies who are in a way in a similar journey, in a similar place with a similar size, and then they collaborate and share as much of the stuff they create, but they leverage the fact that it's now a bigger group to, for example, do things like third-party vendor assessment, or playbooks of incident response playbooks, or how to perform some security activities, or security champions playbooks. All those things that every company is doing, that you then have a way to collaborate within that group, within that cluster.
Yeah, interesting. I think the the sort of SecOpsy side is really interesting. I think the sharing, like one of the things I want to do is start doing comparisons between vendors who claim to a certain performance metric, like we're the best of X in space Y. Great, okay, let's prove that and then share the data behind it. It's that kind of like, because I'm sure we're all in the same communities where we ask like, oh, who's using X, or like we're looking for Y, who's best. We should like have data behind that and sort of shame the marketplace into doing better. Sort of shame is such a powerful motivator. I do wonder, like the vendor review stuff, like we've just picked up Risk Ledger to do that for us, and they have quite a bit of insurance to cover the liability cost if they cock up the assessment and we get popped. So that's like, it's a great idea. Interesting to cover like what's the backbone of it. Yep.
And actually it's interesting because you come from the Grafana world, right? I think what's interesting is also this would allow a good player that wants to do some things in a right way to then talk to even groups of companies, right? Clusters of companies, and have a good representation of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Exactly.
The cabal of buyers, I really like it. I really like that idea.
Sorry, Marius, can you saying something?
Yeah, I was going to say it can be like a positive marketing for the vendors as well, right? Because if we cluster together based on maturity, we all require the similar vendors at the same maturity levels. So we're all looking at the vendors. So it could be that they have a focus group that they can sell their solution if obviously it's good for that type of maturity, but they have that focus group. They're not trying to sell to super mature companies a product that's not mature.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
valid, yeah.
we influence in actually the vendors as well from how they approach the market.
Yeah, cool.
Yep. Yeah,
there
so
a-
that, yeah.
There's no like legal structure, because monopolies don't work that way around. There's no like legal or trade structure whereby you can get in big old state level trouble for doing that kind of thing. Like it's a buyer's market.
Yeah.
Cool. I like it.
Yeah, so I think what's so interesting to think about is again the framework to make this work, and it's kind of like we probably need to pick a couple of good examples, and just because you'll say, okay, so the path to the sort of collect defense cluster is to start with a couple of simple examples that you do X, Y, Z, and then you like one thing in the past that worked quite well was to create a Slack channel, for example, where the companies can come together, they can meet. We can even have, if you want, you can really have a separate Slack for some of these, or have and somebody shares a channel right in one of their Slacks. But that even that simple collaboration already makes things quite effective, and already allows a certain amount of collaboration between the multiple players and the multiple teams, and to figure out what are the new use cases that they can do it.
No, I think that's a good idea, right? I think that's like going back to the first org, they have Slack, right? And it's mostly useless. But actually, having channels where someone can say, I've got an issue with Intune, or I'm having issues configuring Jamf, or like whatever it might be. That's like if it's endpoint management, right? Or we're thinking about CrowdStrike, we're thinking about some other EDR tools. Any opinion? That's kind of like the first steps. And actually, then it's not as prescriptive, right? You're kind of starting to get some sort of momentum going.
Yep.
But
the thing about this is, I feel it's a bit like security champions, is that somebody in that group needs to be making a conscious effort to maintain it, to put energy in the beginning of it, because without it, it just dies, right? Or it doesn't go very far.
But that's why I think even the third party's idea, right? You need 2 or 3 real life case examples of problems that people have. Yeah,
you're right. I think that's a good point. So good. So let's keep the conversation going, right? So let's start. Let's aim to have maybe more panels at the next summit in July. Ideally, not just one generic on the CDC, or maybe an update on where the CDC thinking has gone. And there's we have a Slack channel in the OSS environment, right? Let's use that. But I think it would be interesting to pick some of those use cases and think practically how could that work, and what kind of type of companies, or maybe find companies that want to create a cluster and then put them together and see how they can collaborate.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Marius, Thomas, any final thoughts? James?
No, sounds good.
No, all good.
Yeah, apologies, I was late into this. I got magneted on something work-wise. I've chatted to Dinis about this before. We're keen. Well, I'm keen, cool. Therefore we're keen. So let's go start doing it.
Yeah, and Ante, we missed you, man. He's going to be watching this. So, and for everybody, cool. So look, let's see you at the next summit. Let's continue to collaborate, and let's start making this a reality.
Cheers. Bye.